Hello, hello, hello. Welcome. So this is our last session closing out Inc. Founders House, and we're really delighted to have Andy Roddick here. Please give Andy a warm welcome.
Thank you.
So everybody knows Andy Roddick is a former #1 tennis champion, U.S. Open champion, illustrious tennis career, but also Andy has a number of business ventures and is a founder of a number of companies, which we'll talk about today, including Viewfi, which is a sort of sports telemedicine company. So let's start there, Andy. Why don't you tell us about Viewfi and how it came to be?
Yeah, hi. Everyone okay? Having fun? Good. So the story starts in a very relatable way. I think it was May of 2020, and so I was busy doing the thing that we were all doing where you get 10 friends on a Thursday and you find the bottom of a bottle of wine. And the drunker you get, the more ideas tend to come out. So I asked a question to the group, and it was people from all different sorts of fields and jobs and different places of thought. I said, what is what we're going through? How do you see it expediting, or will it expedite what you do? And so we'll fast forward from there. Everyone had opinions, but one of my dear friends is Josh Dines, who's one of the best orthopedic surgeons in the world. He was our Davis Cup doctor forever, has been the doctor for the Mets, Rangers, and a lot of other things that it seems like he's fit into a very short amount of time.
Sports medicine guru.
Yeah, exactly. And so he was telling the story about how there was this expectation set around being able to diagnose MSK injuries through FaceTime. And so it was basically, he goes, I spend all day, every day now telling someone, speaking to professionals and people going, okay, back up. Okay, now stop. Now stand up. Arm, and basically making them go through these. If you have a torn rotator cuff, there are going to be certain movements that cause you pain. So it was his version of saying, this is going to expedite. Telehealth was already out there. You can do a lot of it. If you're checking something for your skin, if you're, explaining symptoms of a cold, there are a lot of things that can be done through telehealth at that moment. A diagnostic tool for orthopedic injuries certainly wasn't one of them. And so I asked him a couple more questions, and I called him the next day, and he's like, oh, someone will do this. And I said, is anyone doing it? He said, no. And so I called him the next day. I said, were we overserved, or is this an actual...
Both could be true.
Two things can be true. Anyways, he says, no. He goes, I know I can diagnose 90% of my patients through a series of small tests, and if they walk in, and range of motion is a big thing. So if your left arm can do something and your right arm can do half of that, there's something going on with the right arm. I need to be able to run through tests. Even without touching you, I can have you hold a book out, and if it collapses, it points me in the direction of the area of which something is wrong. And so he goes, but I know nothing about software. I have no idea how to do it. So obviously, as a former tennis player, I took the reins.
Yeah, right. I was going to say.
I didn't. Another good friend of mine is a gentleman named Michael Williamson, who's exited 3 software companies, was between jobs, and he's someone I just use as a mentor, co-invest in some things. And I was running it by him, and he was, the more we talked about it, the more he kind of got a hold of it. And he goes, I think the technology is very doable. So he gets roped in. Fast forward, we now have a platform.
When did it launch?
Well, that's moving target, I guess. The technology was pretty good, about a year out. In the last year, so one of the things that we've faced that's pretty tough is the question of, I want my doctor, if my shoulder hurts, to put his or her hands on me. Right. And so we had to kind of almost be fail-proof. So our first for-profit partnerships that weren't just kind of test cases and for data were about 2 years ago. So we were transparent. We're with Horizon Blue Cross now. So basically, we're the front door to MSK, right? If your back hurts, you can go to physical therapy. You can go to chiropractic. You can go get imaging. You can do nothing and take Advil. The list goes on. There's 6 points of whatever you're comfortable doing. Simply, we want to be a diagnostic tool to where if we don't know what's going on, we at least know enough to not have you make 3 trips for one injury.
And is your core audience, are you democratizing this kind of medicine for a broad group, or is it for athletes and former athletes?
No. I think our experiment at first was basically for the doctors and maybe their systems, and then once we kind of the technology was there, we kind of became obsessed with the idea of geography not dictating access to health, costs of health, and most importantly, where we felt like we could really add to the solution, quality of care. And so we decided to kind of think a little bit bigger after having been chewed out by someone who didn't invest in us, who said, you got it all wrong. I like the product. I don't like you all. But it was the best feedback we could have gotten in that moment. So so now we can go straight to our patients through one of their services.
Now, you've had a portfolio of business and business interests as an investor for a long time, kind of like, going back years. But Viewfi seems to be one where you're a little bit more front and center as a co-founder. Was that a conscious decision, and how did you think to do that?
No, there was no plan. I was in the middle of the medical side, where I had very deep and trusted relationships, and our CEO and co-founder, Michael, where I can add value is helping to get the right audience. If there's a raise, they're curious because either I'm the dumbest person on the planet, or they're pleasantly surprised, that you're beating stereotypes for athletes. So there was a value add. Now that we have 45 some odd employees and are signing contracts with some of the bigger insurers in the world, I don't add much value besides trying to explain to you what we're doing, and or just spreading what that it's a better test what we do than what Josh might do with less data points in his office.
Now, some of your earliest entrepreneurial ventures were real estate investments and more like passive income. Was that sort of a strategy at that stage in your life? And can you talk about how you got into it?
Yeah, it was as simple as the dumbed down version is I have the most boring real estate company you've ever heard of. It's triple net spaced, interest rates were low, '08 hits, you're sitting on a lot of liquid capital made from a sport, and we bought a bunch of banks, and they kick off a return that outpaces what you're paying on interest and loans. So that was it. And now we're in 12 states and 100 some odd properties, and clients are Home Depots and Starbucks. And so I think we overvalue a success rate for ideas. I think timing matters, and we just kind of got a little lucky.
Yeah. So when did you started doing investments in you have a beverage company you've invested in, a cookie company, more consumer facing stuff. Can you talk about how those came about?
Yeah, that's hard. That's tough. Basically, where I got after my career, I retired in 2012. I don't know that I was as interested in the just pay-to-play endorsement side of things anymore.
You were like 30 then? Or?
I retired when I was 30.
Yep.
Yeah, retired from one thing when I was 30. I get annoyed when other people say it, so I shouldn't say it about myself. I retired from one thing at 30, but to keep hawking products when your value is quickly diminishing wasn't something that I wanted to do. I was more concerned with, if there was a investment rate where I could add value and that was factored in the investment. That's what I was attracted to, because there was a little bit of upside still there. It started with a brand called Travis Matthew, which was a retail clothing brand. I don't know if anyone's actually from Austin or you're just hanging here, but Tiff's Treats is another one.
Yeah. This is a cookie delivery?
This is the cookie delivery. It's like my favorite. I love them so much.
I love that as a former athlete, that you're like, the cookie delivery business I need to get into.
Yeah, no, well, it was as simple. Where my mind was for that stretch of 3, 4, 5 years post-retirement was they came to my wife and I and said, we'd like to do some ads. We love your product. I've to the detriment of my former career, I've been eating your cookies for a long time. I would like the opportunity to invest in your company and not just have you pay me X amount to show up for a day. In those conversations, sometimes you get laughed out of the room, but I don't know that I ever regretted asking the question.
Yeah, and your beverage brand is a liquor brand, Sweetens Cove Spirits, right?
Yeah.
And that's an investment that you have with other athletes, including the Mannings. What's that experience been like?
Yeah, it's a complete pain in the ass, I'll tell you.
The worst.
It's hard. It's some guy shaking you down because that's how we've done it since 1942 here, son. But it's fun. That one was, it's more based around a golf course. That's a 9-hole public golf course in Tennessee. It's really just storytelling. We have a great product, but I'm not going to pretend to know something great about bourbon. We need someone who does, and then Peyton and I like to say we're not the faces in front of it. We try to help being the shoulders behind it. And so we're not front facing. Our names aren't on the bottle or anything. But Tennessee actually makes a great product. There's this rivalry between Kentucky and Tennessee. Tennessee, Peyton's basically Tennessee Jesus. So we decided to lean in a little bit.
And so, like, as you think about business ventures going forward and where you're going to invest or where you're going to be even more of a co-founder, how do you assess opportunities and what catches your interest?
I'm doing a lot less angel deals than I was doing before.
How many did you do at your peak?
We were up around probably 60 some odd deals.
60?
Yeah.
Wow.
But a lot of those we're not talking about because they sucked. But it happens. But I think I'm now in the place where stuff is up and running and you're involved. And if I'm being honest, I was probably searching for something post-career, and this interested me. I probably wrote some bad checks because I was learning on the fly and on the job. Doing less now, kind of just more committed to fewer things. But listen, it normally starts with a friendly conversation where I'm curious about what someone's saying. I don't know that I've ever been sold on something. I like to hear about something, and then I try to sell backwards and try to be involved in something.
So talk about that. What is that process like for you?
Leon comes from Tip Streets. They want to do a thing. I want to learn what their radius is, what the special sauce is. He goes, you put your hands on our boxes, and they're still warm. That's unlike any cookie you buy in a grocery store, and that resonated with me. I'm like, that is a good feeling, right? When you put your hands on it, it's the first sensory thing that you don't think about. You think about taste, you think about smell. That got me, and I became obsessed with that thought. The ability to make warm cookies, the new flours, or the new edible arrangements where no one ends up eating anything, and you gotta
It's a weird thing to throw away.
Kick them out in 2 days because you see flies. So and then I just basically start asking questions and then try my best to wedge myself in there.
Yeah. You talked about some deals that have gone wrong or gone awry.
Yeah.
What can you think of one that you really learned from and that really sort of changed your approach or the way you sort of judge deals?
Yeah, there was a concept called Charlie at the time, which was basically, now it would have morphed into a paid YouTube subscription, but in 2015 it was basically we tried a subscription model for a second screen experience. It's basically Cameo did a lot smarter because they just made it voice notes and took out the video interface, which is always weird. We did the video interface and we were wrong. It was one of our first follows on Twitter, and then they just did it way better and way more cost effective, and they basically got the smartest parts of any idea correct while we were kind of stumbling and fumbling. And the lesson learned from that is there's a real value in simplicity and not trying to boil the ocean.
Well, that's interesting. Now, you also, in addition to investing, if that's your second act, you've had maybe a third act and a fourth act. Third act as a philanthropist, and you have the Andy Roddick Foundation, very active here in Austin. Can you tell us how that came to be?
Yeah. So the Andy Roddick Foundation, we serve 40,000 kids a day in the Austin area and Central Texas area. After-school summer programming, nothing to do with tennis. Growing sustainable foods, basically just different life skills. My good friend, we have opposite paths. I was tennis and sports and this thing, and he was Harvard Business School and the whole thing, but we've been friends since we were, so basically trying to combine those two things. What did we pull? What were the value adds out of both of those things? And start a kind of a curriculum. I know exactly when I was inspired for it. My idol is a guy named Andre Agassi.
I've heard of him.
Yeah, good player. He was gracious enough to let me kind of tag along, and he would use me as like batting practice when I was 17. And I asked him one time if he had any regrets. He said, I didn't start my foundation early enough. And this is coming from someone who has completely transformed an entire side of Las Vegas through charter schools. But also, credit to tennis, because we're kind of first in line for a lot of stuff, right? Like Billie Jean King, and then you look at Arthur Ashe, and then you look at Martina Navratilova being the number one player in the world, defecting from a country, coming out in the early 80s.
And being a champion.
Equal prize money champions. We get kind of pigeonholed as this country club sport where not a lot of our champions actually live that experience. And I feel like we're kind of front of the line on a lot of important thinking. And so I think I was just kind of in the right vacuum.
So you're with Andre Agassi. He says he wished he had started his foundation sooner. Where was this?
We were on a plane on the way to Florida we were actually in Houston playing an event, and he's always working on something. Always he gets off the court, his head's down, he's doing something. So we're about 30 minutes to landing. He's okay, 30 minutes. Any question you want, nothing's off limits. Yeah. And I was like, oh, this is like the best. Like, this is like Christmas come early. So we go into the whole thing.
But you didn't ask him about tennis, or at least maybe.
No, I did. I asked all that also, but there was 30 minutes. I asked what it was like to kiss Brooke Shields, all the stuff.
Oh, good.
And
you hit the important parts. Yeah.
The important parts. And then, anyways, so he said that about his foundation. And, you know, our first venture was we did a tennis clinic in a parking lot at my school.
And how old were you when you started the foundation?
17.
Yeah, right.
17.
So.
And so, anyways, here we are, and you know, like a lot of things, Viewfi included, you get something started, you get an honest line of communication with people who are smarter than you, and at some point, you're way less important to the actual organization, and that's a very good thing.
Yeah, and however, in last year in 2024, you were honored at the U.S. Open for your philanthropic work. Is that right?
Yeah, one of probably the only tennis idol who I haven't met in person was Arthur Ashe, and the award's named for him. So it was it's nice for us. It's not often that my former life mixes with whatever I'm doing now. So yeah, night one of the U.S. Open last year, we were the chosen recipient, which was cool. I think I like my source of pride for that is I think it's very rightfully validating for our staff, our teachers, our volunteers.
How big is the organization now?
It was really cool. We have 15 full-time employees, volunteer-based in the thousands, and like I said, we serve 40,000 kids a day. We do 3 schools of direct service, and then we run 40 other out-of-school time programs that are a little bit more specific to arts or specific towards literacy or kind of different things around town, but all out-of-school times, a support system for families. So, you know, underserved communities, if you have a single parent, they're not deciding whether they have to leave work at 2:30 to go make sure that their child is safe and that whoever around them is around them is being additive. That's kind of the big thing that I didn't think about at all before we started what we do is giving the parent the ability to work guilt-free, conscious-free, you know, another 3 or 4 hours in the day while, you know, hopefully their kids are learning something from our teachers.
Well, that's a huge problem to attempt to solve, right?
It was like we wanted to help. The intent was good. The way that it's morphed is not because I was any sort of thought leader. It was because I trust people who are way more accomplished in the space at delivering what's needed in a given area.
And if I can ask, like, you know, what is the sort of budget or the funding of the organization today? How big has it grown?
We raise. How much have we raised?
Yeah.
Close to $40 million.
Well, congratulations.
Yeah, thanks.
It's really amazing. So you mentioned that you sort of enjoy when your tennis career can, in some ways, intersect with your work today. And one way that they intersect that's really obvious is your podcast, Served. Can you tell us, like, how that came about and what satisfaction do you derive from it?
Yeah, so we do a very nerdy tennis podcast. Basically, my producer Mike's in the back. I'm starting to figure out all my stories revolve around getting drunk.
Yeah. And you own a liquor company, but I don't know.
All right. Well, we can fix that problem later. But anyways, we were just talking. If you look at a tennis broadcast, it's kind of been the same for a long time. You open on 3 people out in whatever pavilion they're in. They kick it into, you know, however many McEnroes are inside the stadium. They talk about it, and then you get to the tennis. But nothing's really changed aside from overhead cameras and kind of cooler shots and graphics, right? It's still, and there's no place. 8 weeks a year, a lot of people pay attention to tennis during the Grand Slams. There's a lot of field and a lot of runway for people that could be interested outside of the slams. No one was attacking new media, so YouTube, Apple, Spotify didn't exist. Ghost town, or very, very small things. So it was basically it was a pretty lazy idea. Just let's attack that and actually have something and storytell on like random Tuesdays when tennis fans still want to be engaged, but it's not totally available because everything kind of revolves around live programming or has in the past.
What have you learned about sort of, you know, now being part of media or new media as a result of doing this?
It's like drinking from a fire hose of how views are valued. There's no Nielsen rating, right? It's like how views, how many click-throughs. I don't know how to TikTok. it's just crazy. YouTube views are, if the complete watch through is valued different than if people are tuning in for 10 or 15 minutes. So it's basically just learning the ins and outs of that. The easiest part is getting on and talking about what I've done since I was 7. It's kind of the only thing I haven't had to learn from scratch from anything I've been involved with post career. I like it. We did a show with Rafa Nadal a couple days ago that will come out tomorrow, and
The spoiler.
yeah, it's kind of self-serving. I get the ability under the guise of this media entity to have Rafa sit down. Tennis players don't like pass each other in the locker room and go, well, what did you think about that matchup that we just had? Would you like to break it down? Who do you think? Like I've never talked tennis with Rafa ever. We played 10 plus times, and so for me, all I want to do is get up and be inside of his brain and ask him how he views certain things, and I get to do that now, which is great.
Were you surprised at how he remembered or what he remembered from those 10 matches?
Yes, I went into like my stress points of, on top of, the high notes of his career and, winning Roland Garros 77 times and all of those things, but getting into what my challenges were when I was across from him, and he finishes the story for you, right? It's like, I have to check with this way, you go that, and then he goes, and then I get you with the forehand up the line. I go, and then you get me with the forehand up the line. But it's fun to kind of speak the same language of experience, but we've never actually had the ability to sit down and trade stories.
It's like cathartic, right?
It's just fun. Like, I don't know. I wasn't involved in tennis much for 10 years post-retirement, and now it's like I've fallen in love again. I play all the time again. Maybe I needed space, but like sitting down with an absolute legend like him and having an excuse to ask people to come basically give you their time to nerd out, under the guise of a business or a podcast is pretty fun.
I'm curious, like you sort of said that you're very attuned to YouTube views and completion rates. Yeah. Is there some change that you've made to the structure of the podcast or the way it's produced based on the audience feedback?
I want to be pretty honest. I always say I don't. Producer Mike, I think, has a hold on it. I don't know that I ever want to be, this song plays, so I start dancing faster.
Right.
I think we're pretty honest. I think one of my annoyances with sports media and kind of just media in general, I never want to be the person that I can have a criticism of your game, but I never for a second want that criticism to sound like I think it's easy. Mm-hmm. Right? I think that's largely lost. It's like, well, you should just make that. And then that's like the end of a segment. And some guy who's never done is never been in the arena, has very, very strong opinions, and is then checking their likes. I don't want to be the person that checks life. I want the content to love up to that. The only reason I need to know any of it is because I need to be responsible when we're pitching to a sponsor. Yeah,
there was sort of an interesting moment this year at the Australian Open where Ben Shelton kind of like went back at the media a little bit and said, like, hey, some of the questions in the conversation was a little rough or disrespectful. What do you think of that moment?
Listen, I was always and I was pretty, I was pretty tough in press conferences sometimes. My theory was, if you can sit here and ask me absolutely anything with a public audience, I think I have the right to respond with what I think is fair to a public audience. So I don't know that I thought the line of questioning was wrong, and I also think Ben has every right to think it was, and he can voice his opinion. And that was after like a random second or third round match, and we're sitting here talking about it in Austin 2 months later. So there probably is value in that too.
Yeah. Were you? Have you been surprised by the success and the reception of the podcast?
Yeah, like I think it was. I thought it was going to be kind of like a side hustle, and now we're outrating, networks committed to tennis. So I think it's more of what people wanted that wasn't being served, pun intended. It's the name of our podcast. That wasn't.
Find it everywhere you access podcasts.
Yeah. That just wasn't being served. We had an idea. We thought something wasn't being met, and I think the numbers bear out the fact that we're not, anything extraordinary. I just think we met fans where they're now consuming their information.
And earlier today, you did a session at South by with Brené Brown. Can you talk about that?
That was fucking amazing.
Yeah.
Oh my God, she is unbelievable.
She open up your mind and see what's.
Well,
in
it was
there?
great. It was fun challenge for me because normally I can be, the fallback is if I'm doing an interview for our pod,
You're the expert.
yeah, or like I'm in the room, I can understand what Rafa's saying, right? I know the terms he's using. I can fall back and, he was number one for all the time. I was number one for a cup of coffee, but I can understand the general premise of what he's saying. So for me, it was fun to take someone who's so well researched in things like shame and being isolated and all these big ideas. And okay, what in my sport was weird that I thought was normal? It's like doing it alone all the time. At that point, you couldn't talk to anyone for 5 hours. That's a weird thing. I didn't realize was weird until I actually started watching tennis with friends, and they were like, that's a strange thing. Mm-hmm. Being in the locker room, looking at an opponent this far away for 5 hours before you go out and play a Wimbledon final is kind of weird. You share a lot. Like, all these things are kind of weird. Traveling is isolating. You're doing it at 17. So basically just kind of better understanding the former version of myself through her lens and through her knowledge. That episode's out Thursday. But she blew my. I have so much respect for her. I basically used this whole South by thing when Vox wanted us to do a live show, used it as an excuse to maybe get someone like Brene Brown. That's completely out of the realm of what we would normally do in our stupid little show that we do out of a basement.
Yeah, and you sort of talked about how you kind of went away from tennis for 10 years, it sounds like. Is that right?
Yeah, I started, COVID happened, there wasn't a lot going on, and Tennis Channel reached out and basically said there's no live content. They basically needed someone to just read the phone book for 2 hours.
You're like, I'm here, I'm available.
And I was like, I'm not doing anything. And so I kind of got back in. That was have you guys ever read emails back from like that moment in time in 2020? Weird. Have you done it? I read the initial thing with Tennis Channel. They go, yeah, let's do this for a month, then we'll be past this, and they'll go back in studio, and it will have been fun. And it's still doing it the same way through Zoom for them also. So it's, but I've enjoyed it. It's gotten me back into the game. Maybe I needed space to absolutely love it again. I was fatigued by it when I stopped. I didn't start playing when I turned pro. I started an adult work day every day when I was 7 or 8 years old. So, yeah, it's great. It's like I'm falling in love again. It's been a really fun experience that I never thought would happen. My friends would have bet their houses that this wasn't going to be where it ended with tennis.
That's really interesting. And so as you think about Viewfi and your sort of new business, where do you see that going? Where do you aspire for it to go?
Just more. I think the big idea, and I've already said it today, is scaling the care in a cost-effective way and giving the same opinion set that I was able to get as the number one tennis player on earth conveniently where you're at. Yeah. And just more of that.
And there are a lot of folks here who may be former athletes or may have kids who are athletes. And as you think about like your experience as an athlete, as a kid and a young person, and then you think about how that prepared you or didn't for your business career and your entrepreneurial career to follow, what advice would you have to everyone?
I'm not one for advice. If kids are playing sports, the number one question I get asked that drives me nuts, I don't know if any of you have kids that play sports, how long should they be practicing every day? I'm like, I don't know. What kind of kid are they? Like, I don't know anything about your kid. I don't know how we could answer that. You can tell when a kid spaces out. I think a focused hour is better than a laborious 2.5, 3 hours where kids don't want to do it again. When I started, it was a lesson a week. And then by week 4, I was begging my parents to like let me go more and more and more and more and more. But listen, sports is a great trainer because you're accountable to other people all the time. You can't lie to it. You have to learn how to say, I wasn't good enough or I was. There's no excuse making, right? I'm not better than Federer because we've proven it 21 times. So I do think it shows, you kind of have to. I was good. I made the Hall of Fame, and I lost almost every week, which is a weird thing to think about.
Yeah, and as you think about like sort of the next investment that you want to make or the next idea that's going to inspire you, your curiosity, your desire to ask questions, can you give us a sense of like what do you think that might be or what it looks like?
I want to do more interviews like I did today with Brene Brown, which was loosely based in tennis, but I want to know what she does on a random Tuesday. I want to know what her life looks like outside of the YouTube moments, traveling from thing to thing. How does she, if she's writing 87 emotional sets down in Atlas of the Heart, there were 40 that didn't go in there, or there were 40 ideas. I want to know what actually makes it through the bottom of the sifter and what that process is like. And I want to spend an hour talking about that.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, Andy Roddick, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.